There are moments when a story doesn't just crack open, it shatters, and this is one of them, because when a man who has lived inside the very core of royal secrecy suddenly steps into the light and says something that doesn't fit the official narrative, you don't just listen. You stop everything, you rewind, you question everything you thought you knew, and that's exactly what happened when Dickie Arbiter, a man who built his entire career on silence, precision, and protecting the monarchy, allowed a single suggestion to slip into the public space, not gossip, not rumor, a suggestion that Meghan Markle may have been married more times than anyone was ever told. And suddenly, the fairy tale didn't just wobble, it started to collapse.
One of the most senior former royal staff speaking out. And
they can do the royal bit when they feel like making a bit of money, they can do that. Well, they got their comeuppance from the late Queen. Meghan is called Her Royal Highness. The likelihood is that she will be. The fact that she is divorced is neither here nor there.
At the reception, Meghan wore a simple white dress with a shimmery silver belt. Estimated cost, $300.
Meghan Markle is petrified her ex-husband Trevor Ingleson will pen an explosive book.
Ninaki Pretty is actually the exception in the Disposable Friends series for Meghan Markle.
Because here's the thing no one wants to say out loud. Men like him don't guess, they don't speculate, they don't wake up one morning and decide to throw chaos into the world. Every word they say is measured against decades of knowing exactly what those words can do. Which means when he sat there, calm, composed, and dropped that line into a documentary that was always going to reach millions, it wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. And that raises a question that refuses to go away. Why now?
makes it even more shameful that this woman would be showing up wearing a white veil.
Why break that silence now, after years of carefully maintained images and controlled narratives? Because if this was just another rumor, it would have stayed buried, but it didn't. It surfaced, and not from the shadows, from someone who spent over a decade as the voice protecting Queen Elizabeth II herself, a man who understood exactly what the royal family allows to be said, and more importantly, what it never allows. So when he speaks, it's not noise, it's a signal.
But they probably feel they're no longer working members of the royal family. They can do what they like. They're in California, nobody.
And that signal points to something uncomfortable, something layered. Because if there were suggestions, plural, about more than one marriage before Prince Harry, then the story we were shown was never complete. It was curated, controlled, constructed piece by piece until it looked flawless under the world's gaze. The white veil, the chapel, the symbolism, it all felt like a beginning. But what if it wasn't a beginning at all? What if it was just the latest chapter in a story that had already been rewritten more than once? Now step back and look closer. Not at the headlines, but at the patterns. Because patterns don't lie. They repeat, they echo, and once you see them, you can't unsee them.
The Suits star was married to Trevor Ingleson, a film producer, but they split in August 2013. They were together for
a quiet civil ceremony in Los Angeles. Not public, not celebrated, not even fully acknowledged. A date, a document, locked behind confidentiality. And here's where it gets strange. This wasn't happening at the peak of fame. This was before the global spotlight, before the royal connection, before the world cared. And yet, even then, there were legal barriers, NDAs, and restrictions and silence built into the foundation of something that should have been simple, natural, open. And that's where the tension begins to rise, because people don't build walls like that unless they're protecting something, not privacy, something deeper, something that needs control, because control is the one thread that seems to run through every chapter of this story. Control over narratives, control over records, control over what exists and what disappears. Think about it. A wedding that later appears in Jamaica, sun, smiles, celebration, but behind it, whispers that not everything from that day was meant to survive. Photos allegedly erased, footage gone, moments that should have been memories, turned into fragments. And the question lingers like a shadow. Why erase a day that was supposed to be one of the happiest? Because happiness doesn't need to be hidden, but history sometimes does. And then come the people, the ones who were closest, the ones who stood beside her when no one else was watching. And one by one, they vanish. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, completely. A lifelong best friend, gone without explanation. A powerful ally who opened doors into elite circles, suddenly distant. No public fallout, just silence. Again. Silence. It keeps showing up, doesn't it? Because silence can protect, but it can also conceal. And when you line it all up, the confidential ceremonies, the erased records, the fractured relationships, the carefully timed revelations, it stops looking random. It starts looking structured, like pieces of a puzzle that were never meant to be assembled until now. Because now, the pieces are shifting. The people who once stayed quiet are starting to speak. Carefully, yes. Measured, absolutely, but speaking nonetheless, and once that begins, it rarely stops, because silence, once broken, has a way of unraveling everything that depended on it. So here we are, standing at the edge of a story that no longer feels controlled, no longer feels contained, a story where every answer leads to more questions, where every revelation feels like the beginning of something bigger. Because the real question isn't how many times she may have been married, it's this: who already knew, and how long have they been pretending they didn't? Because if the cracks are showing now, then whatever is beneath them hasn't fully surfaced yet. And that's where this story gets dangerous, because once you start asking who knew, you are no longer just looking at one person's past, you are staring directly at the system that surrounded her, protected her, and possibly chose silence over exposure. And that's where this story stops being just about Meghan Markle and starts becoming something much bigger, something far more uncomfortable. Because let's rewind to that moment. The chapel doors opening, the world watching, billions of eyes locked on a single image, a woman in white walking toward Prince Harry into what was presented as a brand new beginning. But what if, behind the scenes, it wasn't new at all? What if it was already layered with history, sealed documents, unanswered questions that had been quietly acknowledged but never publicly addressed? Think about the symbolism, because in royal circles, nothing is accidental. Every detail is chosen, approved, analyzed. The veil, the color, the presentation. These aren't aesthetic decisions, they are messages. And yet, there she was, wrapped in the purest imagery of a first-time bride, while whispers, quiet but persistent, suggested a far more complicated past, a past that, if true, would have made that symbolism feel almost staged. And then there's the part nobody can quite explain away: the atmosphere, the expressions, the subtle discomfort that some observers claimed to see in Queen Elizabeth II during that ceremony. Now, of course, expressions can be misread, moments can be taken out of context. But in hindsight, with everything that has surfaced since, those small details start to feel less like coincidence and more like clues, because sometimes what isn't said speaks louder than anything that is. And this is where it gets even more complicated. Because according to those who have studied this closely, there were conversations, quiet ones, behind closed doors, concerns raised, questions asked, not publicly, not dramatically, but carefully, in the way institutions protect themselves, and the suggestion that Prince Harry may have been warned, that he may have been told to slow down, to reconsider, to look deeper before stepping forward. That possibility changes everything, because if warnings existed and they were ignored, then this wasn't just a story of hidden pasts, it was a story of choices, of decisions made despite information, of a path taken even when signs may have pointed elsewhere. And once that idea takes hold, it becomes impossible to ignore. But then comes the question of timing. Why did everything escalate so quickly? Why did the relationship move at a pace that left little room for doubt, for scrutiny, for hesitation? Because speed, in situations like this, isn't just momentum, it's strategy. The faster things move, the less time there is for deeper investigation. The less space there is for inconvenient truths to surface. And then, layered on top of that, is the context of where things stood at that exact moment in her life. A career that, according to many, had reached a plateau. A show nearing its end. Opportunities not expanding the way they once had. A crossroads. And suddenly, an entirely different world opens up. One that offers not just relevance, but global visibility, influence, permanence. Now pause right there. Because that shift from one world to another isn't just a change in circumstances. It's a transformation of identity. And transformations like that don't happen casually. They are managed, directed, controlled. Which brings us back to that word again, control. Again. Control over what is seen, control over what is known, control over what is forgotten, because when you look at everything together, the NDAs, the confidential records, the disappearing relationships, the carefully curated public image, it doesn't feel scattered. It feels intentional, like a long-term pattern that didn't start with royalty, but simply adapted to it, expanded within it. And that's what makes the latest revelations so unsettling. Because if someone like Dickie Arbiter is now willing to say, even carefully, that there are suggestions of multiple prior marriages, then the barrier that once kept these things contained is no longer holding. And once that barrier breaks, it doesn't just leak, it floods. Because here's the reality no one can avoid anymore. Every controlled narrative eventually reaches a breaking point. Every carefully hidden detail eventually finds its way to the surface, and when it does, it doesn't come quietly. It comes all at once, in fragments, in contradictions, in pieces that don't quite fit until suddenly they do. And when they do, the picture changes. Because now, the question isn't just about what happened in the past. It's about what still hasn't been revealed, what documents remain sealed, what agreements are still binding people into silence, what stories are sitting just out of reach, waiting for the right moment or the right person to bring them forward, and perhaps most importantly, who else is still holding back? Because if history has shown anything, it's that stories like this don't end with one revelation. They escalate, they evolve, they pull more people in, more details out, until the version of events that once felt solid starts to look incomplete. And that's exactly where we are now, standing at a point where the official story no longer feels like the full story, where the gaps are too visible to ignore, where the silence that once protected everything is starting to sound different, not protective anymore, suspicious, because silence, when it lasts too long, stops being reassuring. It starts asking questions, and those questions are getting louder. Because if the past was as simple as it was presented, none of this would be happening. No senior insiders would be speaking. No patterns would be emerging. No contradictions would be surfacing, but they are. Which means something, somewhere, doesn't line up. And the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to pretend that it does. So now we're left with the kind of uncertainty that doesn't fade. It grows. With every new detail, every resurfaced claim, every carefully worded statement from someone who knows more than they're fully saying. Because make no mistake, what we're seeing now may not be the end of this story. It may just be the moment it finally begins to unravel, and if that's true, then what comes next won't just reshape how this story is told. It could completely change how it's understood, because the truth, whatever it is, has a way of forcing itself into the light, and right now, it feels closer than ever.